Alright, so listen, I am back with another Gouache 101, and this time for this episode, I'm going to go very, very basic, okay? I'm just going to show you some things about the way the paint behaves, and we can just get into it. But first of all, and speaking of basics, one of the things that people ask about is the brushes. What brushes do you use with gouache? You can use just about any brush with gouache. Now you're going to have some preferences, right? I have some preferences. One of the things one of the things I started using mostly was synthetic brushes. You don't need to spend money on a lot of expensive sable brushes or anything like that, like you would with watercolor. I would recommend it with watercolor. It definitely helps out. But there are also a lot of good synthetic brushes to use with watercolor. Now this is an old red sable brush, Kolinsky red sable brush that I have. The thing is, this actually is pretty good. It didn't hold its point all that well. It's okay. You know, the thing I like about the synthetic flat brushes now, these are, and just before I get ahead of myself, this is also a synthetic brush that I use. That was this. They're both. This is. I can't even see the manufacturer's name. I just think it's Utrecht brushes. I'm not sure if they still have them, but these brushes were okay. I mean, it's synthetic, and it looks pretty much like the other brush I just showed, but it's a little bit stiffer. I mean, it doesn't. I find that the synthetic brushes are a little bit too flexible, too soft. Like these as well. These are. This is, I believe, this is an imitation squirrel brush. This is Black Velvet is the name of the brush. It's okay, but for gouache purposes, it's just way too soft. Way too soft. And but it would be great. This I would use a brush like this if I'm doing like mostly water, you know, more than pigment. And so I'm putting it in as I'm laying it down as I would a watercolor. So that's why I would use something like that. But most of the time, these are the brushes that I will use. Here's a Utrecht brush, and no special name here, but this is a number 4 synthetic brush. This is another brush I purchased. I think this is Royal. What is it? Royal Line Nickel or something like that. I'm not sure. It just says Royal on here. But I mean, there's nothing special about the brush. It's just a matter. This is Princeton, which is a great brush. I think you find these at Blick Art Supplies, but again, kind of soft for my purposes. This is a synthetic sable, and this is very useful. Again, synthetic is the way to go. This is a Winsor Newton Cotman brush. This synthetic brush is fine. Another Princeton round brush. I believe this replaces, I don't know if they make these Utrecht brushes anymore, but they're about the same thing. They both come out of Blick Art Supply. Princeton Art and Brush Company. This is a good brush there. Lowell Cornell round satin. This is one of those white synthetic sable brushes. Again, these flat brushes I kind of like because I can cover better with them. But that's just the brushes aren't special, right? Just as long as it's a decent brush, you're going to be fine. Like I said, personally, I find the sables are too soft. Squirrel hair brushes are too soft. Some people use bristle brushes. For me, that's too hard. So the synthetic brushes are kind of like that sweet spot for me. So what I'm going to do today is to show how to cover we using the paint. And another thing is that with the paints, what you want to make sure and do is not to use student grade paints. All right, student grade paints. The problem with them is that they several things. I had a company ask me to review their paints a while back, and they were terrible. They were student grade, and I had to be honest, because if I'm going to share it with the people who view my videos, I got to be honest about what I use. And the number one thing is that when you buy a good brand of gouache, like what I usually do is keep them in this airtight palette, but even then they dry up, right? And so what happens when they dry up, there's a little color got in here. What happens when they dry up, sometimes they get, this is near to crumbly, and other times they're just hard, right? So what you can do with a good kind of watercolor is to just take some water and just wet the paint. Get a, just you can, what it is reactivating the paint. What I couldn't do with the student grade color is reactivate the paint to where it covers like it's coming out of the tube. And so here's the black, and you see it's a rich color, right? I can go ahead and so one of the instructors that I had in high school, I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York City. He painted with gouache, and what he would do would keep a bottle of water in with a spray nozzle. And so to reactivate his paints, he would just spray his paints in the morning, reactivate the paint, and then it worked fine, like pretty much like this. So, and then I'll wait a little while and I'll do something else with that. But in the meantime, let me put this to the side. Talk about covering, getting a nice getting a nice bit of paint down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use lamp black. And squeeze a good amount here. And titanium white. Again, take this out. Squeeze a good amount. Right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix some grays. Now I usually do this with oil paint. I haven't really done this with gouache. Let's say okay, take about same amount of white and mix this up. And so this would be like 50-50, right? Okay, so just want to make sure that it's all mixed up. Alright, so that would give me about a mixture of like a middle gray between the two. Alright, so I want a darker color. Then I would put more black than white. Take a little bit more of this black. Now, for the purposes of this video, I don't need to mix a whole lot of this. I just need to get a good amount. And I just want to get this gray somewhere in between here and there. Alright, so that's a bit darker. So what I can do now is mix a much lighter gray, and so this gray would have less of the black. All right. So there we have our white or black. This is the next darkest, this is the middle dark, and this is the lightest gray. So we have a little batch to work from, right? So just one more thing before I go into the rest of this. I want to take these paints one more time. And another good thing that you do with good gouache, that once you say, I'm going to take, let me use a different brush that doesn't have that much gray, black in it. Start with the first brush so I don't contaminate my white paint here. Let me keep it as close to one of the things to do, right, is to make sure that you don't contaminate your colors, which I wind up doing all the time. So I get, you notice I use white the most, so I have two compartments here of white. So, and I chose this because what I wanted to do was to go over this paint and see how it covers. Right? That's good paint. You know, that's what are you looking for in a in gouache. Okay. So one of the things to get a good cover, right? Like I made these squares, right? So what I want to do is take this middle gray, take this middle gray here, and I would first outline it. One of the things also, you gotta have like well, these paints came fresh out of the tube really nicely. So you got to have a good ratio of water and paint. Like if the paint is too thick, you don't want to, you don't want to use the paint too thick. So the thing is to work rapidly. And if I did my job right as far as mixing the paint is concerned, it won't be streaky. Now, okay. Okay, so then you just let it dry. Now I can go ahead and do like what I did there. When it's not a mixture of a gray, when it's just straight out of the tube, it is much easier to get this without streaking. When you're using the color straight and you're not mixing it. So the thing is to get a good balance is not too much water, and so the water will also add to the streakiness. So, but you also want to be able to move the paint around, so you just add enough water to do that. And there's no hard fast rule. You just apply the paint as quick as possible, and then just let it dry. The thing is that it'll dry kind of spotty as it dries, but usually it's just one uniform, and that's what you want to do. Get one uniform color, and you let it dry. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about was I mentioned that you want to get artist grade paint instead of student grade. And usually when you go to a good art supply store, they'll let you know what it is. If you look on their website, it'll tell you. Let me see. This is Holbein, which makes a great gouache. This is Holbein gouache. So Holbein is definitely an artist grade paint. You get Holbein, you get Winsor & Newton, Turner Design Gouache is also a great gouache, and it lets you. Let me see here. Usually it'll tell you on the tube. The permanence of the paint, whether it's light fast, and well, these colors are light fast, so I'm not concerned particularly about that. But a light fast color is one that when colors expose to the sun, it tends to fade. So light fast colors are the ones that do not fade or are resistant to fading. And the other colors are what you call fugitive colors. Those colors, when they're in the direct sunlight for too long, they will fade away. An example of a fugitive color that I know right off the bat is alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson is like a favorite color of artists. And the problem with alizarin crimson is that it's fugitive, and that when it's exposed to light for long periods of time, after enough time passes, it will fade from the painting. So there are other alternatives to alizarin crimson. There's vermilion. Vermilion is expensive. There's quinachrome. I don't know how to pronounce that, but quinachrome rose is another color that I use. Not as expensive, but it is not fugitive. It's very light, fast. There's the cadmium reds. But you know, the cadmium is a metal, and some people don't like that in their paints. So you can do with the quinachrome rose, and just experiment. Look at other paints, but I would check definitely if you go on the website. They will state whether or not the paint is light, fast or not. So you have to Winsor Newton, Turner's Designer, Gouache, Holbein. I can't think of other brands yet. I think there's it's something Graham is another good brand of a artist grade paint. So those are colors that you can those are tubes that you can purchase. So here we've got, right, one of the things that I want to go over, one of the things that make gouache unique is basically two things. You can paint, say like this is the middle gray, and say I want to go darker and lighter, right? So and I want it to fade. So thing is, I want this to dry pretty well. So one of the techniques you can use with gouache is what you call a dry brush technique. Now I want to come back in here, right? A dry brush technique is basically, this is when it actually is more pigment than water. So I get rid of some of the pigment here, and I start brushing in on this side the lighter color. Now what I should do is actually go in more smooth on this side and then come back in and so I'm just dry brushing the paint, and so you get the effect that the paint is blending. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but apparently my son is laughing in the background. Not at me. He's on, you know, kids are on their Discord or their whatever social media, and to me it's kind of funny. Okay, and when this dries, you can go further and go in with just water and continue to blend the paint. Okay, so now Let that side dry a little bit. I want this side to be darker. So I don't want it to be all the way black, but I can go ahead and put the mixture that we did here. And be careful not to, like what I started going here, because when you go over the area too many times, it tends to lift up the paint underneath. But that was the reason why I wanted it to dry some more. Okay. Now, say I wanted to blend a little bit more. What I can do is just add water. And one of the things gouache does is that it'll get darker when you add the water, but when it dries, that darkness will fade. Because the wetness is a reflection. The water is a reflection of the paint, and eventually it'll dry and it'll be matte. Okay. So, and you can keep working into it, but again, just be careful. Don't go over it too many times while it's wet. So, okay, so there's areas in here. Let me go back in here because that loosened too much of the paint underneath. Okay, there's areas in there that are wet, but once the and that appear darker, but once the paint dries, that'll fade away. One of the things with gouache is that it does two things. Sometimes the light colors will dry darker than you expected, and the dark colors will dry lighter than you expected. And sometimes they're affected by the paint that's underneath as well. And so you get a mixture of things that are happening, But what you want to do is you want to be very deliberate in your approach. You say you want to lay it down, and then when you cover again, when you come back into it, you want to not keep going over the same area. You want to hit it as fast as you can. So say we want to do, I'm going to see if I can just have fun here. It sounds like, what's that guy, Bob Ross, right? We're going to make a little happy place here. So I'm going to use this as my background color, or my background value rather, right? So I should have did a little sketch beforehand, so I have an idea of what it is I'm going to do here. But I figure, suppose I wanted to do, say, a quick landscape, right? Okay, it's not dry yet, but let me see if I could. say these are rocks, and some landscape there, and there's an ocean there, right? Okay. So this is something I really should have worked out ahead of time, but what the hey. So how can I separate this? Maybe I can go back into the white and say right here, add some clouds. But you see how in this simple sketch, right, I'm able to paint over, say I want to do, I can dry brush this here. Now, I didn't plan this, so it's not like the greatest thing in the world, but it serves to just show that I can get something going. Right? Maybe there's a just dry brushing here. There's a reflection in the water from the clouds. You know, but it's lousy, I know. But the whole thing is that I can make something up with just that. Let me just see if I can pull up something to show you guys. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so here's a painting I did a little while ago. This is done in gouache, and I did exactly what I was showing you with the grays. It's done in black and white, so I used ivory black and titanium white on this. And so just doing that same thing of painting as I showed you, using sometimes a dry brush technique, sometimes just painting directly over something, sometimes blending it with water, you know, just all these different things as far as laying down the brush strokes. And sometimes you can see in the background that some of the paint is just mainly thin with water. Mostly on her face, some of the paint is more heavily applied. And then in the hair, you can, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a bit of a texture that I use a dry brush technique, and the same thing with that's the hair on top of her head. Then there's her little bun, right, where I've also either used a little bit more water or just dry brushed into that and let the hair go into the background that way. So, but basically, that is as far as paint application is concerned. Now, the other thing to be concerned about, we talked about brushes, we talked about paints, we didn't talk about surfaces, right? So what you want to do is you want to get a good surface that's receptive to the color or the paints, right? You don't want to use something that buckles too quickly or that maybe sinks into the paper or maybe beads up on the paper. You want to use the right kind of paper. So there are several papers you can use that I can talk about. Let me just make sure I get those out. Where did I have those? Okay. Unfortunately, I don't. Oh, here they go. Here they go. Okay. Here we have Arches paper. Oh, my apologies. Let me take off this image. Here we have Arches, right? Arches is a good brand of paper. And what I use is Arches hot pressed. Hot press is very smooth, but it also takes the paint very well. It's not a slick surface. It's a smooth surface, but it's not slick. And usually people paint watercolor on these. There's also their cold press, right? And the reason why I like hot press is because of the smoothness. I don't like the too rough texture on it. Doesn't, I don't believe it helps the paint, at least not for me. I'm not comfortable with it. This is Lennox. This is made by Legion. They make another good paper called Stonehenge. Stonehenge is also a very good paper, and it comes in different colors. You can buy it, like I usually buy a tan or craft color to the paper, but it's similar to this, and it's actually a printmaking paper. You can buy large sheets of it and cut it down, or you can buy pads of it. So Stonehenge and also Lennox. It's 100% cotton, so is the Arches, so it's a good brand. And basically, you can, it's nice. It's, let me see, what is this? This is 250 GSM, so it's a nice thickness. That's another thing, is you want to not go below 140. Okay, you can paint on pages that are lighter, as far as they're not as thick, but it's not a great idea, you know. I kind of like the heavier papers. And another thing, this is Strathmore. Now Strathmore makes a lot of paper, and they're well known. This is a vellum Bristol paper, right? So, and this is what I did this demonstrated on. Bristol paper is very nice paper to work with, and as long as it's not smooth Bristol. This is a vellum Bristol. Smooth Bristol will be too slick, and you know, either if you use too much water, the paint will bead. If you know, or it'll just be too slick as you build up the paint. It'll just be just too slick to paint on. So I wouldn't use like they're smooth. I forgot what else they call it. It's not called smooth. It's called something else. It's plate. Plate. I wouldn't use their plate, right? I would use vellum. Vellum has a slight tooth to it, and it's very nice to paint on. So you have that. There's also illustration boards, which are, you know, very thick sheets of paper you can use to paint on. There are other surfaces. The thing that, again, I would stay away from is the type of cheap paper that, you know, that the paint will sink into, or too thin a paper, or too slick a paper. Okay, you want to have something that has like a little bit of a tooth, but it's not too rough. You want to have something that is thick. This is not terribly. This is a thick piece of paper. This is let me see what it is. This is 260 GSM, so it's 100 pound, right? So it's a good sheet to work on. So you want something that's decent, that'll hold up the paint, that won't buckle, and when it gets wet, and so forth. So a lot of times, like the arches, those watercolor papers will work well. They work good for you. They're good, heavy. My preference is to not get anything that's too much of a tooth, like cold press. My preference is to get a hot press sheet, which is has a slight tooth, a very, very slight tooth, but it's mostly smooth paper, and the paint sits well on it. And then again, just nothing below 140 GSM, so that you get a thick piece of paper to work with. Okay, so that's pretty much it for our Gouache 101. I just wanted to have more of a technical episode where I talk about the paints, the brushes, using them and in this way, and just getting used to the paint, because one of the things is that you have to get used to the materials that you are working with. So using them, doing exercises like this, and is a good way of getting used to the paints. There's I didn't make this stuff up. This is stuff that was either taught in classes. I actually got this from a book, one of the very few books written on opaque watercolor. It's out of print. Let me see if I could pull it out here. This is out of print now, but it's a very old book, and it's let me see if I could see. It's full of those exercises as far as dealing with how to use the paints, how to lay down. See, this is the exercise where this person drew the rocks in a drawing, then did the shapes, then came back into it with the gouache, light and dark colors. Here's what we talked about as far as working out, how to lay the color in, and then just the gradation and so forth. Different types of ways you can use the brush. Like I said, there weren't too many books written about gouache, which is a shame. There's a lot of nice things done in gouache, especially by illustrators from the golden age of illustrators. They use gouache as well as oil, so there's a lot of nice things to do that can be done with the paints, right? Once you learn how to use them. I'll just leave this here. Once you learn how to use them, but that's pretty much it. So I'll be back next week with another episode and another conversation about gouache, and we'll get into the 101. So if there are any questions regarding gouache or anything that you might want to know, might want an explanation of, definitely leave your comments below, and I will definitely respond to them and talk about the paint. Okay, so all right, so next week then. Bye bye.